Caster Semenya, and I probably am pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, she's a South African middle distance runner, two-time Olympic champion. Okay. So she's been a controversial figure, not for anything that she's done, but because some people have questioned her gender almost from the beginning of her career. And there are people who've claimed that she probably has an intersex condition, although she's never publicly said anything about that to my knowledge. Basically, because they questioned her gender, and just to be clear, she's very fast, and she's very muscular. She has what some people think is a traditionally more masculine appearance. And so because of this...
Which is not rare for female athletes.
Right. And...
I mean, we think in terms of... And I want to explain that, right? Like, there's a context to it. So we have in the West a historic context. If you've ever studied art history, for example, male bodies have traditionally been portrayed as very muscular and very athletic, whereas the female bodies were generally portrayed as softer and, puffier.
Rounder, yes.
Yeah, and this is sort of kind of how we have grown up in our history of how we view things. So when I say it's a more traditionally masculine body, this is what I mean by that. So just to explain, this is a judgment based on a social context crafted by history.
Yeah. So anyway, because there were complaints about her supposed gender, she was actually subjected to a fairly intrusive medical examination to determine whether she was, in fact, female. And they came back and they're like, yeah, she's got a female body. It's, it is what it is, Well, people weren't really satisfied with that. And so they pursued this. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport has ruled that if she wants to continue to compete, she has to take medications to lower the level of naturally occurring testosterone in her body, okay? Because this Court of Arbitration for Sport has ruled that she has too much.
I don't personally know anything about this, but I did hear an interview on NPR where they were talking about this just yesterday afternoon, and one of the things they noted is that there's really no evidence that testosterone even is impacting performance.
Right. Yeah. There's no evidence that it actually...
It's just like an arbitrary metric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the point. It's like they've determined that 5 nanomoles per whatever deciliter or whatever of testosterone is the upper limit. And so how many nanomoles of testosterone do you have?
No idea.
I have no idea either. So...
But I do have a friend who is a man who is in treatment for low testosterone.
Yeah.
So it happens. I mean, it's, what are you going to do?
Yeah. So both male and female bodies produce testosterone. Male bodies obviously produce a lot more testosterone than female bodies do.
Yeah, you would generally expect at a physical that you're going to, have different levels of certain, especially hormones, between I guess men and women. It gets so complicated though, even when you think about it in terms, because it is such a strange bell curve, or linear progression, I guess, from one end to the other, where you get this mix in the middle, and then so it's just But if you're born with a uterus, they expect certain hormones.
Right.
Right. And if it's different, then that's considered, outside of the range of, I guess, most people with a uterus. But this is somebody brought up an interesting thing though the other day. It was a different case. It was a trans woman that was competing, and they were kind of flipping out. I was kind of offended by the thread because I sort of thought, great, this is women athletes are going to do a lot better. Yeah. With trans women in the mix, right? Like, hey, we're gonna start breaking some records here. Yeah. And but these folks were kind of freaked out, right? And they were just like, oh, it's unfair advantage. And so they were just kind of going off on it. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. Trans women are women. And I don't apologize for that. But what somebody was saying was maybe it's time to rethink sports categories. Maybe it's time to look at it, like when you look at even though it's broken down by gender, when you look at fight titles, you got weight classes.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for the weight class, right? And there's advantages with reach. Somebody has longer arms. So you've got these. You have to have fight with different styles based on how your build is, and but you even with wrestling, there's a weight class, right? And so there are things that even when you pull gender off the table, we recognize as ways to categorize it differently. And how we categorize it really is up to us.
Yeah.
I mean, as a society, we have to say what is fair, what is not fair. And if there's something going on here where we're having to look at certain women and say, but you can't compete as a woman,
Right.
then I think it's time, I do think it's time to start saying, well, then what are the alternative categorizations of how we classify competition? Because if this isn't going to work anymore, then we need to start thinking of how we're going to adjust it to accommodate reality.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, in this particular case, we have a woman who is, she was assigned female at birth, and apparently based on, like, what we normally would associate with the criteria for assigning someone female at birth.
I think both situations are a demonstration of, how this is not working anymore. I mean, think about it. If we had never had the stigma tied to transsexuality or transgender that we have, and trans women were always competing in women's categories, nobody would be saying, oh, unfair. We would just think, oh, trans women are fantastic women athletes.
Right.
I mean, that would be the interpretation of it.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that we haven't had it that way before that makes us look at it and say, well, this is different, this is wrong, this is an advantage. And it's like, it wouldn't be any of those things if we recognized trans people according to the gender that they identify.
Well, and it's a certain brand of misogyny at work here, because no one does, I guess they do some tests on men to determine if their testosterone range is like off the charts or whatever, and it's an indication that they're using some banned substance to increase that. So I think at some level there's a recognition that certain cocktails of banned substances will produce enhanced performance. But
I don't think people should be doping.
Right. But, within what's considered the normal range for men, which is much, much higher than what women produce, okay? Within that normal range, no one's saying, oh, well, this guy naturally produces testosterone at the upper end, so we should require him to take drugs to lower his testosterone.
Right, because he has this weird advantage, like the weight classes. They don't have like testosterone classes.
Right.
Right. If they want to do that, first of all, they need to figure out if that actually is an advantage.
Right.
And then if it is, then let's go ahead and roll that out. Right. Like I'm big on, I have this thing where it's like this weird side thing with driving while drunk. Right. And I'm just like, they need to have a reaction time test. And that needs to be what we roll out, because that's what it is we're trying to judge, is reaction times.
Right.
And right now, that's not what they're looking for.
Right. Because being sleep deprived will make you as bad a driver as someone who's impaired from
and
alcohol.
sleep deprived doesn't go away.
Right.
It's not like I was looking at my cell phone, that's why I was driving. I'll put my cell phone away, officer. Sleep deprived is you're going to put me back on the road, and I'm still not safe.
Yeah. So, again, we don't know that this actually even confers an advantage.
Right.
But this is like so one of the things I made a point of on a Facebook page when I posted an article about this is that when you're talking about world-class athletes, almost all world-class athletes are to some extent freaks of nature. Okay.
Yeah, like you got the basketball players that are, 7.5 feet tall. How many people are 7.5 feet tall?
Yeah, average height guys, you don't see a lot of them playing in the NBA.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, but it's
rare,
not the norm.
Yeah. And we understand why.
Yeah, and so so she has this genetic anomaly, or variation.
She's a little outside the range of what most women are.
Yeah.
And that's it. But I mean, she's still.
And so the other thing that's important to recognize is that genes confer only potential. They don't change anything about how you're trained, how you're prepared, your commitment to the sport, or anything like that. So if she had grown up with this genetic variation and had never tried her hand at middle distance running, let's say she decided to take up golf
Or baking.
or whatever.
It's like, I'm going to be a chef.
But just kind of just keep it in the realm of like a competitive sport. If
Okay.
she were a professional
Bowling.
golfer, no one would be saying, "Oh, she's got too much testosterone. We don't want to compete with her." Or maybe they would. I don't know. But again, there's no evidence that this actually makes a difference when it comes to this level of competition, where almost everyone is a freak of nature in some way.
But the thing is, let's say she dominates the sport during her career as a runner. Then you have a woman who dominated the sport, who set all kinds of records, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's not just awesome for her, that's awesome for all women. And it's almost like, when Michael Jordan was playing basketball, at a certain point, you just got to say, if you're a good basketball player and you were born during the era of Michael Jordan, I'm sorry you got overshadowed, right? But it's just like, this was the prodigy of the sport.
Right.
And you have, just like if somebody's a musical prodigy, you don't say, something's weird about that kid, though, so that kid can't compete. We're not going to let them do recitals because they won't let the other kids have it. The whole thing is it's supposed to be, I just can't wrap my brain around locking somebody out of it because they'll do too well.
Right. In an event that is supposed to be all about the extreme limits of human performance in that sport.
Yeah. And what's really disturbing is this idea that, you've got so many people that want to promote this idea that, like, oh, if you have a uterus, then you're a woman. And it's like, so here's this person who is, biologically fits that narrative, and they want to kick her out because of a testosterone level. And it's just like, really? So please tell me, like, where's the list of criteria? Like you were saying, what is my testosterone level? I have no idea. No idea.
Yeah, no one knows.
Now, I might know if it was elevated, right? Like, I guess my doctor might alert me if it was, like, really elevated, but, like, watch your heart.
But if it's a normal variation that you have, it might not even produce any symptoms in you.
Yeah.
And so apparently the symptom it produces in her is that she runs really fast.
Great athlete.
Yeah. So the International Association of Athletics Federations basically has said that I guess the Court of Arbitration for Sport says that if she wants to continue to compete, she has to take medication to lower the level of testosterone in her blood. She just recently said she's not going to do that.
I don't blame her. Who would?
Yeah. And the International Association of Athletics Federations admitted that the decision was discriminatory, but it said that this is necessary, reasonable, and proportionate in order to preserve the integrity of female athletics.
I disagree.
Yeah, I don't agree either. It's like, wait a minute, you're preventing
a woman athlete from competing in women's athletics because you think she's too good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't care why she's too, like you said, she's not cheating. She's not getting some kind of injections.
We're going to preserve the integrity of the sport by discriminating against this one woman who's really good at it.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, there was a woman that swam, and I can't remember if it was just an event or if it was just something that she did, but she swam through like really freezing waters, for like a long distance. And they were talking about how people that do this type of thing, have these different kinds of bodies, like their fat distribution is different, and it helps them be able to do that, where somebody like me would probably just, go hypothermic in 2 minutes. She's able to swim these cold waters for long distances, and it has to do with a different fat distribution. But it would be ridiculous to say, okay, so anybody with that fat distribution can't compete, because you're basically ruling out all the best competitors.
Well, and that kind of brings up the next point here, is that Michael Phelps was a celebrated Olympian during his swimming career, okay? Well, turns out he's got some genetic anomalies that contributed to that. He's double jointed. His ankles bend about 15 degrees more than like a normal person.
There you go.
Which means basically the kick in certain strokes generates about 90% of the forward thrust in the water. And so his kick is even more powerful because he can move his ankles such that his feet become like a dolphin's flipper, which most people can't do. So he's got a much more powerful kick. His elbows are double jointed, which means his stroke for like a breaststroke or a butterfly, it's more powerful. He's got unusually long arms, which is helpful when you're swimming. But the big thing is that his body produces about half the lactic acid as a normal human being, which means he doesn't feel the effects of fatigue like we do. But nobody is saying, hey,
ban him.
You got to take extra lactic acid before you compete.
You got to swim
you're
more
not
laps. You got to swim more laps in real. I mean, yeah, it's just. I mean, you're born lucky. If this is what you've got and it confers you a natural advantage, and you are competing in a sport where you have found that niche where this becomes, that kind of leverage. Power to you.
Yeah,
that's part of the game. This is not cheating.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's just so absurd.
So anyway, I wanted to highlight that because it's basically this intersection of racism, because the competitors who complained were white European women who were not doing well in the races when Castor was running. And so they were the ones filing the complaints. So there's a little racism going on, and there's definitely misogyny with requiring women to meet a certain standard, physically, chemically, whatever, hormonally, everything, in order to even compete as women in their sport.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of, who was the guy that had the prosthetic legs that was so fast and he got in trouble for murder?
Oh, yeah. He was also South African, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, he was South African white dude, right? It was like, but what was his name? So it was, oh, well, anyway, it was the same situation, right? So it's just so funny.
People were saying that the blades he was using were giving him an unfair advantage.
Pistorius. And but it's just, I used that, I think, as an example previously to say, isn't it amazing that, might not have done this show, but I have talked about it, that you have something that up until recently, I guess, would have been just a noteworthy disadvantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like his outlet for athletics would have been something like, a Special Olympic event or something. And here is this guy that's just blowing away, top runners, and he literally has, is an I don't know if he was born without it or if it was amputated, but it's like, he's paraplegic basically, and
double amputee.
Yeah, so, whatever it is. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology. I don't mean to. I'm not familiar with it, so I apologize if I'm using the wrong words. But the guy basically has two prosthetic legs, is blowing folks away, and then there's complaints that this is an advantage, right?
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute, he doesn't have legs, and then you shouldn't be allowed to compete because he's kicking our butts.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. To me, there's something kind of to celebrate about these things, right? The idea that somebody that up until recently would have been considered to have a disability that would have made them unable to even be competitive is now making them so competitive that we question whether it's actually conferring an advantage. Mm-hmm. And you've got this other woman who's just simply born a certain way, and she's and I look at it like, to me, the trans women are born a certain way, and it's just like probably there's many of them who are trying to bring their testosterone levels down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you have a situation where they and all these people are saying, oh, you can't compete, and so maybe it is just time to find some better delineators if we have people that are just blowing other folks away, and we want them to compete in their own category, like heavyweight fighting. Then I'm okay with it, but don't just kick them out of the sport altogether and say you can't compete because you're just too good.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, as you know, I'm involved in martial arts and everything, and in the competitions in my sport, it's they have men's and women's divisions. Obviously, they have age divisions, and then within that age division, they have height divisions, because in Taekwondo, the reach is the advantage.
And I thought of that when I was hearing about, some things like what you're describing, right? Like somebody that's super tall or has super long legs and has a big stride. I mean, we recognize that in other sports that are like non-human sports. So like if a Secretariat was a huge horse with a giant stride, and that's one of the reasons that the horse did so well. I'm not trying to diminish, the running capacity of that animal, but at the same time, when you just can go lengths more than another horse on a single stride. I mean, that's huge. And so you could easily say like, well, your leg height, has a impact on the length of your stride, which gives you an advantage. And if they wanted to do it like that, I would be okay. If you said runners with legs, like have the rides at Disney, right? If your top of your thigh doesn't hit this line, you cannot compete. You need to go.
This is your division.
Yeah.
If
I mean, let's do it if that's what we're going to do.
Well, I mean, the thing is, men do typically have more muscle than women, and so that does confer an advantage. There's higher volume of red blood cells, which confers another, an aerobic advantage.
But I'm saying we can split it up however we want to split it up.
Yeah, there are ways of doing this.
There is no, have to on this. There's just a how do you want to do it?
Yeah.
This is a open thing.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about that because I thought that was just really absurd that they're saying she has to take drugs to lower the level of testosterone.
Yeah, and I don't blame her for not doing it.
Again, she naturally produces this much testosterone. This is not something, she's not doping or anything like that. This is how her body works. And they're saying you have to change how your body works or you can't compete. That's just absurd.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to start kicking people out based on body types, then we need to start rethinking how we're categorizing.
Yeah.
Figure that out. Split these groups up differently.
Well, and the fact is there's considerable variation among women, just as there is among men. And there's some overlap between what's considered normal for men versus women. And so
you might end up with some competitions that are intergendered, you know what I mean? That would be like completely fair. Where you would have men and women competing and it would just be a toss up who's going to win that thing. And it may just be that gender's a bad way to categorize it in the first place.
Yeah. In some sports, I think it is.
Well, it's always just been sort of a general shorthand for stuff.
Well, the other thing, too, is that a part of this conversation is important because it reinforces this notion that there's a gender binary, that you can legitimately split humans into either male or female.
So what would they do? I mean, what would they do if they said, okay, we're going to subject you to a physical, and they come out of it and they say, she's intersexed?
Yeah.
Okay, well, now what?
Yeah.
Right? Now what? She's saying, I'm a woman. She's intersexed. Does she not get to compete now because, she's got some latent testes or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's just, then this is not the way to categorize. If it doesn't really fit, the narrative, then maybe we need to readjust the narrative.
Yeah.
Right. That just makes me so angry when people get all, whatever. Let them shine.